Nights in Nyxar weren't just about darkness, they were the whisper of a world fighting not to be forgotten. The sky, tainted by the crimson eclipse, cast a dark glow over the ruins of Arkhal, where ancient, broken towers rose like bones against the horizon. The wind carried the dust of centuries, hissing through the cracks, bringing echoes of long-buried secrets. Orion Kael'ric walked through the wreckage, his steps sinking into the cold sand, his eyes searching for what was left of the dead city. He couldn't tell if he was looking for relics, or answers to the nightmares that haunted his nights. Every heartbeat seemed to echo inside him, like the planet itself was trying to communicate. Fragments of memories that didn't belong to him flickered through his mind, distant voices, forgotten sacrifices, symbols carved in stone. The essence seemed to whisper between the lines of Nyxar's very existence, a force pulsing beneath the ravaged surface. Orion breathed deeply, trying to shake the feeling that something inside him was awakening, something ancient, trapped in the veins running through his blood. The emptiness that consumed the planet seemed to reflect within him, a growing ruin, ready to swallow everything. While sifting through the rubble, his fingers closed around a partially buried metal cylinder. The artifact was sealed with forbidden symbols, corroded by time but still radiating a cold energy. As he broke the rusty seal, Orion found an old map, with routes that stretched from the Varthalese dunes to the tomb of the Astral Guardians. His eyes locked onto the twisted lines and worn inscriptions, feeling the weight of it in his hands. That map shouldn't exist. The legend said the tomb was destroyed in the last war, but why was that place still calling to him? Before he could think, footsteps echoed through the broken corridor. Orion spun instinctively, his hand already firm on the rusted blade at his waist. Celia Kaer emerged from the shadows, her sharp eyes and a scar marked on her face, a reminder of battles long past. The exiled warrior stared at him in silence, as if she knew him from some place he had forgotten. Between them, the silence felt heavy with buried secrets. She didn't need to ask about the map, her eyes told him she was after the same thing. But something about the way she looked at him made him feel like Celia knew more about his destiny than he did. The tension hung in the air as the crimson eclipse cast long shadows over the wreckage. The rustling of metallic wings from the void creatures echoed in the distance, a reminder that Nyxar no longer belonged to the living. Orion and Celia didn't exchange words, only the weight of what they carried kept them close. The map between their hands was more than just an old piece of parchment. It was a call, and Nyxar was waiting for their response. Orion felt the void grow inside him, like the dormant essence was shifting deep within. Every step through the ruins seemed to echo with memories that weren't his, and the very dust of the planet seemed to recognize his name. Celia watched him, her dark eyes studying every movement, as if trying to confirm what she feared. Her presence was a living scare, a reminder that no one walked through Nyxar without carrying their own losses. The cutting wind hissed through the ruins, carrying echoes from a forgotten time. Orion didn't understand why he felt the call, but every fiber of his body told him this journey had started long before his birth. The planet seemed to pulse in sync with his heartbeat, as if it recognized something hidden in his blood. The map was just the beginning. The path to the tomb of the Astral Guardian stretched before them, buried beneath millennia of dust and secrets. The night stretched like a veil over Nyxar, as the echoes of the past intertwined with the present. Orion's fate seemed tied to the decaying heart of the planet itself, and the truth waiting deep within the tomb was a burden he wasn't ready to bear. Celia broke the silence with a rough voice, marked by time. It wasn't a question, just a confirmation of what they both already knew. They weren't here by chance. The blood of the Guardians still ran through Orion's veins, even if he hadn't yet woken up to who he really was. The ruins of Arkhal held secrets that history itself tried to erase, but Nyxar never forgot. The Astral Guardians might have been wiped out, but their legacy still pulsed in the shadows. As the crimson eclipse glowed above them, the map pointed the way to the truth buried beneath the Varthalese dunes. The void lurked beyond the horizon, and the essence pulsed within Orion, waiting for the moment to awaken. The map Orion and Celia had found guided them through a desert infested with void creatures. The scorching heat of the Varthalese dunes seemed endless, like the planet itself was in agony. The biting wind kicked up small sandstorms, making the journey even more grueling. The shadows of creatures that inhabited the desert moved like specters between the dunes, their eyes glowing in the dark, always watching. Orion could feel the tension rise with every step, as if something in the sands was watching, waiting, ready to strike. With each step, Celia was drifting further away from the humanity she had once known. The exiled warrior, with her calculating gaze, always seemed to be a step ahead, her survival skills sharp as blades. But Orion knew there was more to her. She wasn't just following the map. There was something in her intentions, something he couldn't quite figure out. They were searching for the tomb of the Guardians, but the ruins ahead, like a scar on the land, gave the feeling that they were being drawn towards something much older and more dangerous. Something that was waiting for a bearer. The tomb of the Guardians wasn't a place for the living. The landscape looked disfigured by time, and the ruins rose from the earth like the broken bones of some ancient creature. Orion could feel the weight of the air, as if the space itself was heavy with history, past sacrifices and unspoken voices. Out there, in the middle of the desert, was a trace of a primordial power. The wind, which had once whistled through the dunes, now fell silent, as if the planet itself was listening. Each step toward the tomb's entrance was a step deeper into an abyss of discoveries and mysteries. As they reached the entrance, the map became more than just a simple guide. The runes carved into the stone entrance pulsed with an energy that made Orion's body tremble. He knew something inside him was starting to awaken, but what exactly, he had no clue. Celia, with her watchful eyes, didn't seem surprised. She moved forward without hesitation, placing her hand on the ancient stones. When she did, the runes glowed brightly, lighting up the surroundings as if the tomb itself was coming back to life. The portal opened before them, revealing a dark, deep chamber. Orion felt that something was wrong, an invisible presence looming over the place, like they were being watched. They entered cautiously, but the sense of danger was palpable. In the center of the chamber, resting on a stone pedestal, was the first astral fragment. It was a shimmering sphere full of pure, concentrated energy that seemed almost impossible. Time seemed to slow as Orion approached, the echoes of an ancient war starting to resonate in his mind. When his hands touched the fragment, a wave of visions hit him. Memories that weren't his from a distant, fragmented past. He saw fierce battles between the astral guardians and the armies of the void, the sacrifice of men and women for a future that never came. The voices of the guardians called his name, whispering words of power and destiny. The chosen one, they repeated like a forgotten prophecy that was now beginning to unfold. Orion saw himself in the center of those images, and just as the visions started to intensify, he had a chilling realization. That place, that fragment, was part of something much bigger. Something he wasn't ready to understand. Celia watched in silence, her gaze fixed on Orion. She knew what was happening, but she didn't say a word. Maybe she knew more about him than he did. Her eyes, now sharper than ever, showed that she was aware of Orion's fate, though she wasn't about to share it. The strange and unlikely bond between them was beginning to form. It was as if fate had pushed them together to be both witnesses and participants in something beyond what anyone could imagine. When Orion finally pulled away from the fragment, his mind still buzzing from the visions, the images of war, sacrifice, and the voices of the guardians whispering his name were clear in his mind. He felt a growing weight in his chest, like a part of his soul had been torn out and replaced with something he still didn't understand. But deep down he knew this was the path. He couldn't turn back now. Celia, with a silent gesture, pointed toward the exit. They had to keep going. The search for the next fragment awaited them, bringing more questions and more dangers. But as Orion looked up at the sky, a chill ran down his spine. Something was lurking, something that didn't want them to continue their journey. And for a brief moment he wondered if the planet, Nyxar, knew more about him than he knew himself. That was just the beginning. The tomb of the Guardians had revealed more than they expected, but there was still so much to be uncovered. And something inside Orion, something deeply connected to the primordial essence, was beginning to awaken with more intensity. The destiny was in his hands, but he still didn't know what sacrifice he would have to make to save or condemn everything he loved. Whatever lay ahead, Orion knew he couldn't ignore the whispers of the past anymore. The awakening had begun, and now he was a part of Nyxar's story. But how far would he be willing to go to protect what was left of what he didn't even know he could lose? Leaving the tomb of the Guardians was anything but peaceful. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, as if something was about to happen, something they couldn't control. The heat of the Varthalese desert felt even more intense after the discovery of the first astral fragment, and the wind now carried a strange, metallic scent, like the desert itself was changing. The fragment was now with Orion, weighing in his hands as if it carried the weight of all the promises and curses of the Guardians. Something in his mind still buzzing with images of the ancient war. Celia didn't seem too shaken. She walked with a stiff posture, like she was waiting for the next twist, the next step in a journey she kind of already knew. But even she, with all her experience, couldn't hide the tension that surrounded them. The words Orion had heard in the tomb echoed in his mind like a beacon. The chosen one? But chosen for what? For which destiny? He still didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. The path ahead was full of mysteries, and those mysteries were only going to get deeper. The road to the next fragment was far, crossing treacherous mountains and caves full of danger. But before that, there was something Orion needed to face. What the fragment was awakening inside him. When he touched the first fragment, he felt a surge of energy running down his spine, an energy that didn't seem like it was his, something ancient and vast. As they traveled, that strange feeling wouldn't leave him. He felt like the fragment was connecting to his very essence in a way he didn't fully understand, and the more he tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling became. Celia, on the other hand, kept her own secrets. Even though she never talked about the past that haunted her, Orion had a feeling she was hiding something really important about what they were facing. During the night, when the camp was quiet, he watched her movements. There was something she was keeping to herself, something she didn't want him to know. No matter how hard he tried to figure it out, his mind was too busy with the internal confusion the fragment was causing. On one particularly dark night, with the moon hidden behind thick clouds, Orion finally couldn't hold back anymore. He walked up to Celia, watching the mysterious woman for a long moment before speaking. "You know more about this, don't you? About the fragments, about what this is doing to me?" he whispered, as if afraid the forces lurking in the shadows might hear him. Celia didn't look at him right away. She seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then finally she answered, her voice calm but heavy with weight. "I know more than you think, Orion. But what you're feeling is inevitable. No matter how much you try to escape it, you're becoming what you were born to be. The fragment of truth didn't choose you by accident." She paused, and her eyes locked onto Orion with an intensity that made him shiver. "You're the guardian of the void. The last one. The only one who can stop the total destruction." Celia's words hit Orion like an avalanche. Guardian of the void? He couldn't understand. He remembered those visions in the tomb, the battles, the sacrifices, but this was way bigger than he thought. The fragment wasn't just connecting him to the past of the Guardians, it was changing him. But how? What did this mean for him? "But I'm not a guardian, Celia. I'm just a guy who barely understands what's going on. I have no power." His voice cracked, frustration rising in his chest. "You have more power than you realize," she said calmly. "What you're carrying now is a key. The key to dismantling the void. But the price you'll pay, it's not small." Those words hung in the air. Celia didn't seem scared, but she knew what was coming. She'd already seen what happened to those who tried to control the fragments without understanding their weight. It was a burden most couldn't bear, a burden that wore down the soul and body. The void was an ancient and relentless force, and only the strongest could face it without losing everything they were. Orion stayed silent, digesting those words. He didn't know how, but he felt the truth slowly revealing itself. He wasn't just being called to protect the world, he was being called to destroy it, to destroy something much bigger and darker. Something that didn't manifest in a physical enemy, but in an invisible force that devoured reality. What was he supposed to do with that responsibility? How could he face something that even Celia herself didn't fully understand? The silence between them was heavy, but before he could say anything else, the sound of hooves breaking the night stillness made them look outside the camp. Dark figures were emerging from the horizon, masked riders on black beasts, ghostly figures that looked like they had stepped out from the depths of the desert. They were coming. "We've got company," Celia said in a low but firm tone. "And you're going to need to decide quickly what your destiny is, Orion. They won't wait." The riders were closing in fast, like a storm, and Orion knew another choice was about to be made. He no longer had the luxury of time, he could almost go back. Whatever he had to do next, it was clear that his path was being decided by something way bigger than him. The void was already within reach, and now he'd have to fight not just the enemies in front of him, but also the fate he'd just begun to understand. The battle began even before the sun came up. The sound of the black beast's paws hitting the hot desert ground echoed through the night, creating a creepy melody. Orion felt the weight of the fragment of truth in his hands, now heavier than ever. What he was about to face was no longer just a fight, but a desperate attempt to survive something much bigger and darker than any war or physical enemy. He knew what was at stake wasn't just his life, but the very fabric of reality. Celia was by his side, preparing her blades with the precision of a seasoned warrior, but there was something in her gaze that didn't go unnoticed. She was tense, her body stiff, and her eyes locked on the hooded figures drawing near. She didn't speak, but Orion could tell she knew something was about to happen. Something that would change the course of history, something no sword could stop. "Stay behind me," Celia said, her voice low and firm, not taking her eyes off the approaching knights. She turned slightly, her gaze now focused on Orion. "Remember, they're not just warriors. They're part of the void. Part of what we're trying to stop." Orion didn't need any more words to understand the gravity of the situation. He gripped the fragment in his hand, trying to control the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions building up inside him. He was starting to understand what it meant to be the guardian of the void, but the weight of that responsibility was crushing him in a way he wasn't ready to handle. The void wasn't an enemy that could be beaten with brute force. It was something much deeper, something that threatened to consume everything. "Get ready," Celia warned, and then the sound of the beast stopped abruptly. The masked figures were now only a few meters away, their shadows stretching like a black cloak over the field. The leader of the knights dismounted his beast, his dark armor reflecting the faint light of the moon. His face was completely hidden by the mask, but the energy emanating from him was palpable, like the air itself was being distorted by his presence. "Orion, guardian of the void," the leader's voice came out as a whisper, but it felt like it was coming from every direction at once. "You don't understand what you carry, but you'll soon find out. The fragment is just the beginning." Orion took a step forward, his body filled with adrenaline and confusion. He didn't know who these figures were, but he felt their threat. Celia was by his side, but she also seemed to be waiting for something. "You're wrong," Orion said, trying to hide the uncertainty in his voice. "I'm not the guardian of the void. I'm none of that. I'm just a man who's been forced to carry a burden I don't understand." The leader knight laughed, a hollow, distant sound, as if he were a shadow of nothing, an echo of what no longer existed. "You still don't get it. The void is more than just what you carry, Orion. It's the very truth, the essence of what's beyond what your eyes can see." With a sharp movement, the leader pointed to the sky. In that instant, the full moon began to hide, clouds gathering around it as if an invisible force was controlling the sky. Orion felt the energy around him shift, a growing pressure that seemed to swallow everything around him. The eclipse was coming, and with it, the threat of the void began to materialize in a way he could no longer ignore. "This is just the beginning," the leader said, his voice growing deeper, more threatening. "When the eclipse is complete, the void will be released. Everything you know, everything you love, will be consumed." Orion looked up at the sky, feeling the weight of those words in his chest. What the leader was saying wasn't just a threat, it was a reality rapidly approaching. He didn't know what to do. He was surrounded, with no clear options, and the fragment pulsed in his hand as if trying to show him the way, but he didn't know where that path would lead them. Celia, however, didn't seem worried. She was ready. Her stance was firm, and her eyes were now locked on the leader knight. "We're not letting this happen," she said, her voice full of conviction. The leader knight smiled behind the mask. "You think you can stop the inevitable? The void is beyond you, beyond what can be understood." At that moment, the eclipse reached its peak. The moon was completely covered by the clouds, and the sky went completely dark, as if it felt like the whole world had stopped spinning. The pressure in the air was unbearable, and Orion could feel a wave of desperation wash over him. He stared at the fragment, hoping to find some kind of answer, some direction, but what he felt wasn't relief. It was the weight of the sacrifice that was coming. "This is your destiny, Orion," the lead knight spoke, his voice echoing like it was coming from the abyss itself. "You can't avoid what's coming." The tension in the air was thick. Celia took a step forward, ready to fight, but Orion knew this battle was going to be different. It wasn't just going to be a fight of swords and blood. It was going to be a battle against fate itself, against something neither he nor Celia fully understood. And the void, with all its power, was about to be unleashed. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for the truth that had been buried for millennia. The silence was absolute when the eclipse finally reached its peak. The sky, now an empty void, seemed frozen in time. The air was thick, almost solid, like the whole world was holding its breath. Orion felt a pressure in his chest, a crushing weight that almost brought him to his knees. The words of the lead knight echoed in his mind. The void is beyond you. No matter how hard he tried to fight against it, the truth was undeniable. They were about to face something much bigger than any enemy or force they'd ever known. Celia was by his side, but her stance had changed. She wasn't just ready to fight anymore. There was a calmness to her, like she knew there was something more at stake, something beyond any physical battle. Orion looked at her, and in her eyes, he saw the same determination he felt. They weren't going to let the void consume the world. But what would it take to stop it? The lead knight raised his hand, and from his dark robes, a strange energy began to form. It was like he was channeling the very darkness, summoning the void to take shape. The fragment of truth in his hands started to glow intensely, almost painfully. Orion knew this was the moment to make a decision. The key to saving the world was in his hands, but the truth was, he had no idea what this decision would mean. "Do you feel it, Orion?" The knight said, his voice distorted by the growing energy around him. "The void is coming. There's nowhere left to run. There are no more heroes. There's no more salvation." Orion didn't answer. He could feel the power of the fragment growing, and he knew he couldn't hesitate. Celia once again was at his side, sword in hand, but now he felt more like she was an ally in the fight against fate. They were a force together. And yet, the truth of what was about to happen was inevitable. The void wasn't just a physical entity or a threat that could be defeated by steel and blood. It was a force that consumed everything, even the soul itself. The sacrifice would be the only way to ensure the void didn't prevail. "I don't have a choice," Orion murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Celia looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. She already knew. What he was about to do would be a difficult decision, but a necessary one. She knew he couldn't do it alone. "It's not gonna be easy," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you're not alone." And that's when Orion did what he knew he had to do. With a swift movement, he raised the fragment of truth above his head. A burst of golden light erupted, shining as brightly as a rising sun. The sky, the earth, everything seemed to tremble, responding to the power being unleashed. He felt a deep pain, a sense of loss that he couldn't understand, like parts of his own soul were breaking off. The lead knight screamed, a mix of frustration and fury, as he saw the power of the fragment invade the darkness. The forces of the void began to disintegrate, but not without resistance. It was like fighting against a massive tide. The very fabric of reality seemed to tear, and Orion knew the sacrifice he was making wouldn't be small. He was giving everything he had to make sure the void didn't spread, to make sure the ancient secrets wouldn't be lost forever. But he also knew the price would be high. With the fragment now shining like a star in his hands, he watched as the figure of the lead knight started to fade, the shadow that had surrounded him dissipating, until he was nothing more than an echo. The black beast that had been marching fell lifeless to the ground. The world seemed to breathe again, but not without leaving behind the deep scars of what had happened. The eclipse slowly began to fade, and the moon shone once more, lighting up the earth with a soft glow. Orion dropped to his knees, feeling exhaustion take over his body. The fragment was now dull, and he knew without a doubt that the battle hadn't been won without a cost. What he had done, the sacrifice he'd made, had saved the world, but he didn't know for how long. The void might have been repelled, but the fight wasn't over. This wasn't the end, but the beginning of something new, a new journey. And with it, the hope that balance would be restored for a time. Celia kneeled down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder, offering comfort that words just couldn't capture. She knew what he had done. She knew the weight of the choice he'd made. "You did what you had to do," she said softly, her voice full of respect. "Now let's move on to the next step." Orion looked at her, his vision blurry from pain and exhaustion, but also with a glimmer of renewed hope. "What's the next step?" Celia gave a slight smile. "Now we rebuild. The world still needs us." The sun was starting to rise, the light gently spreading across the horizon. The cycle kept going. And with it, Orion and Celia's fate was sealed. They had defeated the void, but the real challenge was still ahead. Their journey was far from over, but they had gained something precious, the hope of a better future built on sacrifice and courage. And so, as the light of the new day spread across the world, they knew that together, they'd be able to face whatever destiny had in store for them. The world was in a state of renewal, the destruction the void had caused still visible in many places, but the future now seemed a little clearer. Orion's sacrifice had secured the victory, but he knew that this win wasn't final. The void might have been defeated, but the forces it represented would never completely disappear. There was still a lot to be done. He felt it in every fiber of his being. The real fight was just beginning. Celia was by his side, offering him a quiet strength, a constant and loyal companion, just as she had always been. She knew their journey would never truly end. The world was rebuilding, but the balance they had fought so hard to protect still needed watching over. The key to real peace was in their legacy, in the lessons they had learned, and in the sacrifices they made. There was no room for hesitation or fear anymore. They had gone through the unimaginable, and now, more than ever, they were ready for whatever came next. Orion slowly stood up, the pain still there but no longer crippling. He looked at the horizon, where the sun was already starting to light up the land. The road ahead was uncertain, but he felt a renewed confidence. What he'd done, what he'd lost, were no longer shadows of the past but milestones that would define him as the hero the world would need. "You ready for what's next?" Celia asked, her gaze full of both concern and courage. Orion gave a slight smile, a tired one, but genuine. "Yeah. Because in the end, no matter how dark the night may seem, there's always a new dawn." They were ready to start over. Together. They had faced the void, the deepest darkness, and come out victorious, but they knew there was so much more ahead. Their sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. The world had been spared, but it still needed guardians, heroes. And Orion knew that he, along with Celia, would be one of those figures. The journey didn't end there. Destiny still had challenges in store, but now, more than ever, there was hope. Orion's sacrifice would echo through generations, reminding everyone that even in the darkest times, destiny was never truly lost. The future could be shaped with courage, and no matter how tough it got, there would always be a path to the light. And so, as the new cycle began, the hero's legacy lived on. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave a comment, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. I'll see you in the next video.